Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock, tick. There it is. Okay. So today we're getting down to our very last weeks of the class here, right? And in fact, we've only got one more enhancement to review on the assignment. So we'll do that today. And then starting next week, we'll kind of shift into exam review mode. We'll consider the assignment is covered, right? We'll shift into exam review mode and work on looking at the materials that are there and getting prepared what to expect when it actually happens, and see if by then we actually get an exam date. I don't think the last time I looked, the date wasn't set up, but we can look at that next week to get the exam date so that we're all prepared for the exam, because the assignment in this class is roughly half your mark, and the exam, the final exam, is the other half. So really, they are equally important. The last two ethical hacking enhancements, we discussed one of those last week, which was Nocti, and we'll discuss NetR this afternoon. So, yes. And yeah, okay. So the one we want to do today, it's still early. I need to slow down a little bit. Okay. What we need to do today is, where did it go? I forgot to pull this one up. Let me just grab it here. There we are. The project resources document. And we just shift down here. The two that we have left are the two about log files, okay? Right. One is creating a centralized syslog server. Right? Now, the reason people normally give for this is to have a copy of the log files, because they're afraid that hackers who might get into the system would change the log files to remove any record of their activity. And so if we have a local log file, and then we also have the same information on another server, right? Possibly in a different subnet, possibly in a different place, it creates a backup for us. And it gives us a little bit of extra assurance that if we get into a situation where we have to restore a machine or try to track down some suspicious activity, we've got a backup to make sure that that essential information is not completely lost. All right? So this is one enhancement that works with the log files. The other one is also kind of interesting, but it's kind of the other way around, all right? Where in enhancement 6 here, we use the syslog utility by itself to send the messages to a central syslog server. In 7, we turn that around and we set up a service, a listener on the target host, if you like, right? And a little shell script to push out its log file. And then we retrieve it from the one that we're working on and look at it right next to each other. Use multi-tail to see both log files at the same time. Right? So 7 is about using an arbitrary service to view a log file. 6 is about duplicating log file entries, okay, once on the local server and once on the centralized server. Now, there are, advantages and disadvantages to either method, but the 6 is interesting because it's very commonly used and it's a facility that's already there for us. 7 is interesting because it's an illustration of how we can run any kind of arbitrary service across the network, right? And we can do that for any kind of purpose. I mean, the fact that we're running a single script, the fact that the script that we are running just shows a log file, right? I mean, that's all fine, but the point is that script could do anything. It could send out the password file. It could, I don't know, activate or deactivate some service, right? That script could do anything, and it's a general technique that we can use to run any kind of arbitrary service across the network by setting up a listener using XINetV or Netcat, right? And then contacting it from a remote host. 7.1, you set up the service. 7.2, you make your script file a little bit more complicated with regular expressions, right? Now, I know everybody in computer science has a class this year, actually it should be this semester, called Computing Theory, right? Where you talk about state machines and context-free grammars and regular expressions, okay? So this is a chance to put some of that into practice, all right? Regular expressions are a wonderful thing to know for any IT professional. Yes, you're a master of regular expressions. You show that off in the job interview, you got the job. You pass the short list because understanding it is very worthwhile. It saves a lot of time for us. Even simple regular expressions are quite useful. Right? And so log files and log file analysis, regular expressions are just, they go together like, I don't know, nasi and lemak. Right? So this is a chance to, again, apply regular expressions, understand them a little bit better in practice rather than just in theory. So let's start off with just a little bit of theory about how our system logging works in Linux. All right? It's very similar in Windows, except Windows divides things up a little bit differently and it does the assignments of what service logs to which file a little bit differently, right? But basically, deep down, these systems are the same. So let me run down here. Oh, it's right here. syslog. All right. Oops. Magnifier up. All right. Log files, in case we are unclear about that, are a detailed list of actions recorded by the operating system as it goes through its regular operations. And we have ways to control that amount of detail and ways to channel it to different destinations, all right? But use this log file data for a lot of different things, but security and maintenance, right, are two of the highest priority ones. We've actually looked at the log files a little bit when we're trying to debug our email, right, debug some of our services. So log files, they're just very important to us as systems administrators. syslog-d is the system logging daemon, all right? It's always running. We can see it in HTOP, right? But we don't see it in netstat, right? Because it's not actually listening across the network unless we tell it to. If you do enhancement 6, right, you get syslog listening across the network on UDP port 514, and then it will show up in netstat, all right? But normally it doesn't show up in netstat because it uses an internal communication facility called a Unix socket. The rules that determine the level of detail that we want and the channel that information is sent to are in etcsyslog.com. Right? It's called a facility, a priority, and an action. All right? So the facility is the channel. The priority is the amount of detail, and the action in the first example here is saving it to a file called var log mail log. Right? In the second one, it is a robot there. It's sending it to that remote server to get stored in the log files on that remote server. So message facility, it says here a type, but it's actually a channel. All right, and as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a whole bunch of different channels. And 8 different levels of priorities. So it's in increasing order of urgency. Right? Debug is the most detailed. Right? We get lots and lots of information. Info, notice, warning, right, are just kind of more normal debugging levels. All right, those 3 are the ones that we're usually setting the level of detail at those. Error, critical, alert, and emerg, or emergency. I suppose that's what they're talking about in order of urgency or priority. I suppose that's why they call it a priority anyway. All right. Those are ones that, in principle, demand immediate notice. Right? But we have to recognize that these are just conventions. They are all equal right? And it's just a way of channeling certain types of messages to certain destinations. All right? So here's the thing, and again, sometimes we get a little bit of a little bit of weirdness on this one. The facility and the priority are set by the programmers. All right. You have to look deep in the configuration files to find out. Some programmers don't even use syslog. All right. They expect you to log it to a separate file. They don't want to be part of this syslog routine, right? Others will give you some choices, but you have to look in the documentation to discover that when you're setting up the program. Let me just pop over here to the MyTinyNet site for a minute. Hey, here you go. There you go. Let's put that one up there. Put this one here. Up here in the orientation and log files, all right? DNSMask doesn't use syslog, all right, because it's here in dhcpcd.conf instead of syslog.conf, right? Dovecot doesn't use syslog, all right, but the LDAP does, XINetD, OpenVPN, right? All of these have their logging configuration in syslog.conf, but some of our services don't use syslog for whatever reason. It's the DHCP client that doesn't use syslog. DNSMask does. So here's a nice summary, all right? So these are the facilities, and they all have a code, all right? They all have a numeric code and facilities, priorities, all right? Actions, this is a little bit of the syntax, all right? Some file, you can send it to a named pipe, all right, which is like a regular pipe, except it's stored in the file system. There's an explanation that's a little bit advanced concept, and so we haven't covered it in any detail. We touched on it. We touch on it once in a while when we need it, but it's another destination that we could send our log messages to, all right? We'd send it to a terminal, a console, so that it shows up on the screen, all right? Send it to a remote host, or like, for example, an emergency, we might want to send it to directly to the screens for our system administrators. All right, and there's some shorthand shortcuts for using a bang, equals, and a star with priorities. All right, so no event of priority notice or higher. All right, everything warning or lower will be logged. So that's the level of detail we're at. All right. Only events with priority notice. We could split these into different files if we wanted to, all right, using these kinds of shorthand. All right. Now, the numeric codes, as it says there, should not be used in syslog.conf. on Linux systems, all right? You're supposed to use these names in the file, all right, for whatever reason, I don't know. I think it's just another kind of convention, right? So our centralized syslog server is that enhancement number 6. And again, the reason people give for doing this, most common reason, is to have a backup in case of people tampering with the log files. And it's really super simple, all right? You have to just, the startup file for syslog is already set up to capture a particular parameter that we pass in its startup time. So I just say rc.syslog start, it starts in its normal mode. But if I say rc.syslog.listen, I'm sorry, rc.syslog listen when I start syslog, then it starts listening across the network as well as for its local messages. So that's too simple to believe, but it's true. And then all you have to do is get to your other server and make a small change to the syslog configuration for the service that you want to echo the log file lines, okay, to your remote server. So in this case, you stop and start syslog on the gateway, right? And then on the mail host, you make that simple modification, right? Make that simple modification to the appropriate file, login messages to the gateway and the local file var log secure, right? And then again, we've got a little multi-tail with regular expressions exercise to show them in separate windows. Now, that happens to be right here at the bottom of the orientation and log files page. All right. So this is the table that summarizes the log file locations. It's a little note on log rotate and the centralized syslog server here. There we go. All right. Here we go, we can do that. And to have a client system, send the log entries to the server, edit syslog.conf, and that we just saw in the PowerPoint. So here's the simple example. Get syslog on the gateway listening for messages, do a netstat minus TULP, look for it on 514. All right. And then on the mail host, add this line in, authpriv.info. All right. Log in a couple of times so that you can generate some new messages. All right. Let's say root login on dev this and dev that. All right. And then separate the log file, the local ones from the remote ones using a simple regular expression, all right? Using a multi-tail twice on a single file, all right? Using a simple regular expression, 1 to leave out the string that we designate, and 1 to include only the string that we designate. Now that takes us into regular expressions, all right, which is actually the interesting part of this. Again, it's an opportunity to work with regular expressions a little bit more in practice and get an idea of how useful they actually are. All right, they're not just a theoretical thing. They are actually quite valuable for jobs like this. But before we get into regular expressions, let's talk about turning this around. What do I want here? I need to get back up to the menu for a minute. And utilities and there we go. Utilities and multi-tail. There we go. All right. That's log rotate. All right, and again, log rotate is just one that does exactly what it says. It closes the current file, renames it with an extension .1, and opens a blank file, all right, so that we can keep the size of our log file down. Log rotate can work on time, it can work on file sizes, and it's just there to help us keep things organized and current so we don't have to look through a lot of old log file information. All right. Now, let me just mention here, while I'm saying that, all right, the fix config on the patch ISO, all right, changes the log rotate to rotate your log files every time you restart the server. It does a log rotate at boot time. So if you run the patch ISO and you patch up your logging system, these are the changes that it makes to logging, right? You'll find that you don't have a lot of old messages in your log files anymore, right? So you're going to find that they're current, and you're also going to find a .1 and a .2, right? Which were the previous, well, log file messages from the previous two boot ups, okay? And so that, I think, organizes things a little bit better, and it makes it a little bit less cluttered when we're working with log files here. All right, let's hold on to regular expressions for a minute. All right. And, right, so on this one, again, it's dead easy because syslog provides this facility to listen for messages coming at it over the network, right, and duplicates them on the other server. For 7, as we say, we turn this idea upside down. Right? What we're going to do is we set up a listener, right? I mean, and this is basically what we're doing with syslog when we say syslog listen, right? And get it listening on port 514, right? Using XINetD, we can run any kind of arbitrary service across the network. And XINetD, I suppose we could say, is the proper way to do this, right? Because XINetD can handle the multiple connections, and it does the load balancing, and it does the, it gives us some access control, right? Only from is the one that we used for Telnet, right? And there are other ones that we can find in the documentation. So XINetD is really the proper way to do this. We've also got this utility, Netcat, which is totally the hacker way to do it. I just want to spend a minute with Netcat. Right? Here under utilities, it has its own page. All right. So, simple Unix utility that reads and writes data across network connections. All right. Developer says it should have been supplied long ago as another one of those cryptic but standard Unix tools. All right. For some reason it hasn't. I think somehow system administrators were very, very afraid of Netcat because it can be used in so many different ways. All right. And I mean, to do anything across the network. So that's why it's not part of the standard Unix tools. And since it's not part of the standard Unix tools, it has some weird variants and some complications with it. Right? But Netcat can be used as a sender and as a listener. Right? And as I say, the complications come because there are at least three variants out there. All right, one called Classic. We have on TinyNet. We have Classic. That we just call NC, and then we have the BSD variant available as BSD-NC. Now, for example, Ubuntu has one version of Netcat available called NC, but it is actually BSD variant, and it's very hard. It's actually, I've never seen it properly documented as that, all right? You can see it in the examples though, because BSD is a little bit different than Classic. GNU is pretty much exactly the same as Classic. So the bottom line here, right, is to use -H to see what switches you have available. Oh, here's one that I forgot to mention when we talked about this. We talked about Netcat with Nocti and reverse shells in the lab short session last week. I forgot to mention this, that I've seen a bunch of Kali Linux instructions for setting up a reverse shell or a bind shell that use Netcat or NC -E, all right? And in the source code for Netcat, it's called the gaping security hole compile option, all right? which means that Kelly decided to recompile Netcat with that option enabled. And so it's got a non-standard, even though it is an Ubuntu derivative. It's got a non-standard Netcat. So one more complication to toss into the mix, right? But netnc-h will show you what switches you have available, all right? And again, there may or may not be a man page for Netcat on your system, depending on the system administrator, all right? We have man pages for NC and for BSDNC available because we like it. Oh, this one comes with the patch ISO. There's a new script for putting a message into a log file. Actually, we looked at this when we were looking at IP tables, right? And it's not the easiest to understand because actually it is. It's very simple to understand. It just looks intimidating. You know, in the PowerPoint here, there is this list of names and for facilities, and this list of names for priorities, all right? And actually the way this is done in a syslog message is that these are combined mathematically in a certain way, all right? So what that script does is it allows you to specify a facility like mail or kern or syslog or mail, whatever, all right? And specify a priority, critical alert, warning, notice, whatever, all right? So specify one facility, specify one priority, and specify one target host, right? Well, actually, it's made for the local machine, right? So specify the facility, specify the priority, and specify what message you want to write to the log file. And this script actually uses Netcat to put it there. Now, I know what we can do. I have virtual machines that are not patched, but if you look at it here, there is the, where is it? Message to syslog script. So we can see it here. Right, so this again, it just has you just specify a facility, right? And specify a priority. Both of these have to be in uppercase capital letters, all right? Because error checks, etc., are up to you, all right? So it has to be in uppercase on the command line, and it adds them up, and it uses BSDNC to connect to the local listening syslog, all right? This is what we were saying. It doesn't show up in Netstat because it's listening on a local communication channel called a Linux socket, that's in dev, right? Right, along with all of the other kinds of devices. Right? And again, that gets a little bit deep in operating system facilities. So let's just accept it, right? And what it does is it prints the name of the script. You can take that away. You could easily take that away if you like, right? And it prints the process ID. You can easily take that away if you like, all right? And then 3 is the third parameter on the command line, all right? Oh, FP is the facility and the priority. Don't take that one away, all right? But after those pointy brackets, you can take this part away, no problem, all right? And that's just called MSG to syslog. And we can say mail and alert. And my message to the postfix. Log file. And that's the way you can send any message to your log file. And again, that can be a fun thing to do if you're hacking up a system, or if you want to run that as an arbitrary service across the network. Create your own log messages, log them to your own custom space. Okay, so Netcat is there. It is quite useful, and it's just a little bit slower, right? But XINetD is really the right way to do this, right? And so the way we do this for XINetD is my TinyNet site, put the message in the log file. There's the Netcat listener. This is Netcat and named pipes, and this starts to get a little bit deeper, right? But on the multi-tail side over here, it explains that method using Netcat and named pipes. All right, so you probably want to do a little reading up, okay, to before you use this method. But the XINetD method is actually simpler and more comprehensive, more comprehensible. All right. XINetD and Telnet, this is what we did way back in First Things First. All right, so that we would have Telnet for testing our email. All right. Now, XINetD and arbitrary services, all we have to do is make a copy of that Telnet configuration, right? And then make some minor modifications to it, right? So that it will run our show log service rather than running the Telnet service. Okay, we can name it, give it a name. We give it a port, all right? We tell it if it's a TCP or a UDP connection, and give it a user to run as, and specify what needs to be run. And that's really it. And then restart XINetD, and you'll see your service right there on port 23435. I already set this one up just to save a little bit of time. So if I come up here to etc and XINetD.D.D, right? Telnet one that I set up way back when, right? It's got ID and flags, socket type, protocol, right? So just by changing a few of these lines, I get my show log service. Still says service telnet. Should say service show log. Why didn't I change that? Ooh. But I forgot to change it. Show log. It's unlisted because 23435 is not assigned in ETC services, so there's no name, right? But socket type stream protocol TCP, wait, no, that's the same as telnet. User is nobody, I think that's the same as our telnet. Server is the name of a script file that I wrote for this very purpose. Let me show you that one. User, local, in. What's it called? Oh, show fake fonts. Show log. Very simple script. All right, we go back and review what we talked about when we were talking about shell script input and output, when we were talking about pipes and redirection and color codes. Okay, we encountered the read command, right, that reads the command line when we start the script, right? And it can read from standard in, or it can read the variables that come after, all right? So what this one does is it reads the standard in, and it extracts the first thing that's there, everything up to the first space. It extracts that and stores it in a variable called file. And the rest of that, anything else that comes in, gets kind of tossed into this variable called extra that we're not going to use. Right? And so then we call the command tail, user bin tail, -f to follow, and var log and the file name. Right? So we're expecting a file name to be coming in on standard in, right, for this script. Which means the way we use it is with a pipe. Let's check this out. All right. So there's my service show log. And there is my script file. Okay. And this is the way we can This is just a simple test. Right? We can test that on the server with any old file in var log. Right? But we just echo the name of a file there. Right? Var log gets attached to the beginning and pipe it into our script. And that's the magic of Netcat, all right, is that up here, all right, we're just using the local file system, and down here, we're using Netcat to send it across the network. And then when we add multi-tail to that, we get a really lovely civilized display. Let's try it. Echo. What do we see here? acpid.log. acpid.log. Then we pipe that one into user in log. All right, so there we go. Started our Xsignet D, all right, and it stays active, all right, so that if I send a message now, if I use my message to syslog to get a message going into this file, I could actually see it come up right here. We will make that an enhancement for some other group. All right. So again, my personal opinion recommendation, Xsignet D is the simplest method to set up the listener on the mail server, all right, and then contact it from the gateway, all right, using multi-tail so you can see the log file in two separate windows. And that one, my multi-tail go. Yes. And that one is explained down here. All right. Set up the listener, use the Xsignet D listener rather than these instructions. You have to choose one or the other, all right? But once you choose one or the other at this step, the first step and the last step work exactly the same because it's just two alternative methods for setting up a listener for a service. Right? One using Xsignet D. And the alternative is Netcat. All right, let's take a little break and come back and talk about regular expressions. All right, let's 9:36. Hold it here. I saw Windows again already. Assignment deadline is confirmed. Yes. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. We did promise to do that. And if you look at Moodle, thanks for reminding me about that. There we go. That's this one. Here on the assignment details and submission links. All right. 21 December. All right. 21 December is, what's that? 21 December is 1, 2, 3 weeks from day before yesterday, or 2 weeks from this coming Tuesday, if you prefer. All right. And yeah, we can, thanks for reminding me about that. All right. The one submission per group for the report, it is extremely important that you are registered in a group. Where's the assignment groups here? All right. Get. Follow the plan. 166. There's still, 30 people who need to get registered for their group, right? Because if you're not in a group, you won't get credit for the assignment. You can't get an assignment mark because Moodle automatically takes care of taking the single submission and replicating it for all of the group members. So if you're in that space, that 166, get there, right? But otherwise, you're fine. Once you've registered for a group, then all we have to do is get one report per group on the report submission. And everybody in the group needs to do their peer evaluation of group work, right? Download the form from the assignment folder. Really dead simple. How'd it go? Did it work? Were there any complications? Right? All of that is, it worked great, no complications, everything is fine. Then that is great. Just fill it up with that information and pop it in on the submission link here. Okay. If something did not go as smoothly as you wanted it to, be sure to put that in the peer evaluation of group work, right? Because if I'm going to make any adjustments, I need verifiable evidence. I need to have a reason. And the external examiners and the review of results committee and the moderators and the whole layers of oversight on the marking, right, need to be able to see it in Moodle. And that's why the peer evaluation is important. What's the problem with what? Member of more than one group. What assignment is this? Friday, 10th December. All right. We'll start accepting. I'll check it. Nothing to worry about because it's not going to accept. It's not open for another few days. So I'll double check it. But admin, excuse me, there are some admin groups. So in fact, you are always a member of more than one group in Moodle. All right, but I just need to check it, make sure, because if I got the settings right, it works fine. All right, but you have to wait for it to be open as well. All right, it just might just be a misleading error message from Moodle. Okay. Where were we at? Oh, I know what it was. All right. The last thing we need to talk about today is regular expressions. Here we go. All right. Yeah. Regular expressions have a good side and a bad side. They allow us to select what we want to see and ignore the rest, which is super useful when we work with log files, but they do get very cryptic. All right, that's the first problem, is that you've got to figure out what they're trying to say with all of the slashes and backslashes and parentheses and dots and stars and upperkeys and whatever there is. All right, regular expressions can be very cryptic. And even worse, what makes regular expressions more complicated is that there are several dialects, all right? And we use regular expressions within the environment or context of an application. So we need to know which version, flavor of regular expressions the developer has decided to support. And it means that if we're looking at anybody's examples, we need to be able to decipher what dialect of regular expressionisms they're using. So it's a little bit complicated, but worth devoting a little bit of effort to get your mind around it. So the standard Unix tool from way back when is called grep. grep, the general regular expressions parser. All right, and it uses 3 dialects, BRE, ERE, and PCRE. Now, PCRE has become a kind of de facto standard, right? The basic regular expressions and extended regular expressions are kind of mainly limited to people who are using only grep, right, internally for shell scripts and things like that, all right? The application developers more generally, all right, are using Perl compatible regular expressions, all right? Application developers including Java, JavaScript, Python, and things like that. So that's really the, I would say, again, opinions at no extra charge, right? The most important dialect to get familiar with, all right, is the Perl compatible regular expressions, because then you'll be able to apply them in more places. Hang on just a second for me, I gotta fix something here. Here we go. You certainly don't want to use Perl regular expressions because Perl is a nightmare all by itself. It is very definitely right at the top of the list of my least favorite programming languages because of all of its syntactic variations. All right. So the idea of 7.1, all right, is that we want to pick and choose particular lines from a log file, right? We want to select the lines that start with today's 3-letter month and day, and that have DHCP in the line, right? And that's a very common task in log file analysis, right? The idea here is that we want to get the DHCP activity for today, right, on our gateway and on the mail server. That's why this one builds up on 7.1. Once you set up your listener and your show log script on the mail server, right, then it's very easy to modify the script that you're running, right, to contact your mail server to put a nice regular expression at the beginning of it. Right? It actually is that easy, right? When you do 7.1, right, here, all right, step 3, to connect from the gateway to the service, all right, you use a kind of straightforward command, all right, echo the name of the log file, just like what I did before, all right, pipe that through Netcat, wait a few, I think it's 300 seconds, what's that? 5 minutes. Keep the connection open for 5 minutes so that we can do our thing. 300 is not a magic number, but you should have one there so that Netcat won't just close it up immediately, right? Because it ruins the multi-tail display. just like when we did HPAN, right? We put sleep 60 on the end of the command so that we could see it, take a screenshot. You could put sleep 300 there, or however long you want to keep it up. Same thing with what we got here with netcat minus W to wait before closing the connection. And then the host name and the port, get that in double quotes so that it is going to show up in one window. And this is the local file. Now, I did this morning, so I've got it in a shell script already. Let me just show it to you in the editor here. I think it's going to be a little bit easier to see. Where did I put it? Put it in here. There it is. Okay. Now, this, again, is a little bit of a cryptic one, right? But it's explained on the down here, below this part on the multi-tail page, all right? So, what I would just want to point out here, all right, this is my original command. And if I just compare it to what I have here, this is my original command. And I'm going to break it up the same way. All right? Multi-tail, that one says minus S2, this one says minus L. I see what happened. All right. So if I break this one up, I have to swap things around. I have to say multi-tail minus L. Echo the whole thing down here. 23432. All right. So that means the other file is going to be on one side. That's the remote file right there. All right. And so instead of just var log mail log for the multi-tail part, all right, what I've got is I have kept this part exactly the same. Well, I've got a 23432 instead of a 23435, but different file name, but it's exactly the same. All right. All I've done is add the regular expression up here. And also I have set a variable here that has the date. Okay, the date plus %b space %d, all right, so that it looks like a log file date. Then I've got my multi-tail command, right? But instead of just using a simple file name, I use this minus EV part of a regular expression and this minus E part of a regular expression, right? So the multi-tail, and multi-tail processes these regular expressions all by itself, which is really quite nice, right? So the minus EV says ignore lines that have no address or wrong something or range. Right? That plus bar dot is a regular expressions way. That plus bar is a regular expressions way of saying or. The dot star is a regular expressions way of saying any number of characters come before no ADDR, drop that line. Any number of characters coming before wrong or range, ignore that line. Right? And the next one says, I set the variable here, BD. Right? So BD says process the date command with the B argument, and then just put an insert of space, and then use the D argument, right? And save that to a environment variable, right? So Bash is going to save that to an environment variable. And then this one says, EV says, forget these, ignore them. E says, include these, pay special attention and grab these, right? The ones that start with, this is the way regular expressions say start with, the date, right? And then again, we've got the plus dot star, which means followed by any number of characters, and then have a minus DHCP, followed by any number of characters and ETH3. Right? Since we're working on the gateway, and we want, in this case, just the entries that pertain to the mail server, and we've looked at our prompt, and the mail server shows us that it's on net C. We looked at the gateway, and we note that ETH3 as the 76 address corresponds to net C. Then we'll work it that way. All right, that will match up the entries in var log DNS mask log on the gateway with the entries from dhcpd.log on the mail server. All right? So it's actually a fairly simple, basic sorts of regular expressions. All right? Again, it is well worth investing the effort that it takes to understand regular expressions, right? Because regular expressions can be your friends. All right? Minus W switch. There we go. All right, so that's explained in a little bit of detail down here. It explains how to do it in the standard way with grep, right, as a series of filters, right? That's pretty inefficient. We can reduce that to, and look, notice that syntax, what it looks like in a BRE, right? For a PCRE, it looks like what we have with multi-tail, right? And again, can write this in its terse form or an expanded form, and just pointing out some of the syntactic differences. Now, show you something cute here. All right. I didn't feel like typing all of this in. And I'm a very clumsy typist. I'm going to get something wrong. So what I did was I just came here and I said, copy, right click, copy, control C, whatever you like to do, and get back to my editor. Where did you go? Here we are. And pasted it into a file. Took out some of the extra spaces here, since it came in a little bit funny without a tab at the top. And put a magic abracadabra at the top. Ash, bang, stroke, bin, stroke, dash. Now, the next thing I got to do somehow, let me just save this one. Save it somewhere where I can get to it. It's not there. Oh, right. I see what the problem is here. Hang on a minute. Oh, there we go. Give me a second. There it is. And there it is. And we can call this MT-regex. All right, so we give it some weird name like that. And then I've got my gateway running. All right. I don't even need to log in as long as I know my SSH service is running. I just pull up my Win SCP here and get a new session with 192.168.56.101. Log in and that's wherever I parked that. In, here, and it called it, put it in here. You can't see it. Oh, there it is. And right click, upload, and bazinga, I have escaped the burden of typing all of that in by just a little bit of copy paste and knowing my network services. Okay. So yeah, I think these are, yeah, this is pretty much the same. Actually, you can get it right from here if you wanted to. All right. I think this got done before the PowerPoint, but again, this one, ooh, I see. Yeah, this one just takes what I just did and put it into a nicer script file, all right, so that you can just grab it and go with it. Hand up. Hand up. Must be just a phantom hand up. Yeah, I'm going to sit down. Ooh, 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 ooh. Okay. Something I forgot about that. All right. Modify the example to take away BD part of the regular expression. If I want this to work for want the date part to work. There is a problem. Actually, when I saw this morning, I remembered that I had encountered this before, but since you only encounter this problem in the first 10 days of the month, I've forgotten about it. All right, I'm logged in here on my mail host. Till right. So you see what happened there? December 2nd, and oh, if you look right up here at the top, check this out. All right. See where it says November 25th, right up there in the corner. All right. And then it says December 1st. Okay. Somehow that the way they designed the log file thing to work is put an extra space to pad that one with an extra space so that it all lines up and it doesn't wiggle around on the line. It keeps the timestamps in a neat row. But when we do the BD in the shell script, there's only one space, all right? And so it never matches before the 10th. Once you get to the 10th, down to the 30th, the 31st, whatever, then it all works fine. But you do it on the 1st to the 9th, and this one comes out blank. Sorry about that. That's just kind of very small but irritating bug that I haven't come to a good solution for figuring out. But never mind, we'll get there one of these days.